Welcome to the Level 3 Apprenticeship in Procurement. In this video I'm going to go through the structure of the qualification and take you through the learner journey as a bit of an introduction to the course. So first of all, what is an apprenticeship? Apprenticeships are primarily designed for those over 16 in paid employment, and specifically individuals who are either changing role or gaining additional responsibility in that they have not performed those particular skills before. So traditionally this is when a school leaver or someone coming from education would take their first steps in the workplace. However, apprenticeships have been reformed and it's now a worthwhile form of education for those who are already employed, who may have been working for a number of years, but who are going through that change. And what an apprenticeship does is it allows for that extra support when you are moving into that additional role with additional responsibilities, so that you've got that label of a learner, and that can make it a lot easier to pick up that role and to learn. And in addition to that, you've also got the support from the training provider who will provide you with information, with activities, with lessons perhaps, to help you get to that level to be able to be competent at the new role. Apprenticeship standards are developed with stakeholders from industry and training. So essentially these representatives get together and they will produce a list of skills, knowledge and behaviours which a typical person working in procurement would be expected to have in any role. So the standard isn't specific to any particular organisation, it is just what employers would expect someone working at level 3 to be able to be competent at performing in the workplace. And so an apprenticeship is a vocational or a competency-based qualification. So this means you have those list of competencies which you have to demonstrate that you can perform in the workplace. This is a key difference to other forms of education such as professional qualifications. We have to sit an exam, for example the SIPS Level 3 certificate, or college and university education. Just to make that comparison, if you were doing a college course in procurement, what you'd be doing is attending a number of classes, doing some reading, sit an exam, write an essay which demonstrates your knowledge of the subject. However, through all that process, you won't actually have worked in procurement and you won't actually been able to procure anything. You're just learning the knowledge of what is involved. Whereas in this course, what you're being tested on is your ability to perform procurement activities in the workplace over a period of time and in a number of different contexts and situations. And that's where the value of this qualification comes from. It's not just testing your knowledge and understanding. That's got to be done, but it's got to be done in the context of your performance in a real life workplace environment. So procurement is found in all organisations and different sectors of the economy. There are public sector employers such as the NHS, emergency services, central government, local government and the education sector, and there's also a lot of employment within the private sector as well, particularly amongst larger companies. Third sector organisations also recruit and look for procurement, and procurement is slightly different when you're working in these different sectors, and that is something that's covered in this course. But the broad purpose of the occupation is to identify what goods need to be procured and to go through the process of identifying them, procuring them and managing the acceptance and delivery of those goods and services. So if you work in that sort of environment, in that sort of role, then this qualification should help you. So what will you get out of this apprenticeship? First of all, you'll receive a Level 4 apprenticeship in procurement. So that's a certificate that shows you're competent at these things. In addition to that, you'll also achieve the SIPS Level 3 Advanced Certificate in Procurement and Supply Operations. This is awarded by the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, and to achieve this, the knowledge will be delivered to you in a number of different formats, and then you'll sit an exam for that certificate. You'll also receive your Functional Skills Level 2 in Maths and English. And finally, you'll receive a portfolio of evidence which demonstrates your competence in the role. In terms of progression, once you've completed this apprenticeship, you'll be able to progress onto a career within your industry with the confidence that you've been able to demonstrate your competence in that field. Once you've completed this qualification, you may look to do additional training. You could look to progress onto a higher level apprenticeship. There is a level 4 diploma or a level 4 apprenticeship in procurement. Or you could go look to do a degree apprenticeship. You could also look to do business related undergraduate degrees. The acceptance criteria will vary from institution to institution. Alternatively, you could complete a business related professional qualification. So that would be, for example, going for the level 4 SIPS qualification. And you could look to specialise in a particular role. So this is when you progress into your career within industry, you may wish to look to specialise in a particular area within procurement, such as a purchasing assistant, procurement coordinator, or working as a bids coordinator perhaps. So now we're looking at the qualifications framework, and this is a level 4 apprenticeship, so that's on the right hand column, and you can see that is equivalent to a higher national certificate or year 1 of a university degree. So this qualification at the core is knowledge, skills and behaviours, and that's what makes up the standard. So the standard is a list of knowledge, skills and behaviours which you have to demonstrate that you can perform in the workplace to achieve this apprenticeship. And on the screen there is a number of examples of the KSBs which are involved in this qualification. This isn't a full list. The full list can be seen in the endpoint assessment strategy document. But this gives you an idea, so you have to demonstrate that you can do things such as monitor and order stock, develop specifications for requests, quotes and tenders, to understand the role of procurement within your organisation, to understand value for money concepts, and to be able to demonstrate key skills such as being professional, being enthusiastic, and being self-motivated. The apprenticeship will last 18 to 24 months. This duration is flexible, so some learners will complete sooner than those 18 months, and other learners may take longer than the 24 months. The qualification ends when you meet all of the requirements to gain your certificate. Some learners do take longer than the 24 months. If there's good reason, it can be extended, but there has to be good reason to do that. The apprenticeship programme is split into 3 key stages. The first stage is the on-programme phase, and this is sometimes referred to as the learning and assessment phase, because during this phase you'll complete learning activities and assessments, and by assessments largely that means putting together your portfolio of evidence that proves you can perform these skills in the workplace. The on-programme phase is the longest phase of the apprenticeship, and typically that will last 12 to 18 months. Once you've met the requirements, you can move on to Gateway. Gateway is essentially a check or a pause to ensure that you as the learner is ready to move on to the endpoint assessment. So at this stage, we would review your portfolio, check you meet the requirements, and conduct a mock endpoint assessment. You'd then move on to endpoint assessment, and this is where your competency is actually assessed. And this grade that you receive in this stage is what goes towards your apprenticeship qualification and the grade that you actually get for that. Your competence isn't determined based on the on-programme phase, it's solely based on the endpoint assessment. And in this stage, you'll be allocated an independent endpoint assessor who has had no prior relationship to you before that stage to complete those assessments. So let's start with the on-programme phase, sometimes called the learning and assessment phase. So if you think about it, when a learner comes onto this programme, they are completing a new role, and so they're not all that competent at performing those knowledge, skills and behaviours in the workplace. By the end of the apprenticeship, the learner can demonstrate that they are competent. So to get from the start to the finish, you have to learn. The first stage of the on-programme involves putting together an individual learning and assessment plan. The standard is the same for all learners, and procurement is a very broad field. We've already mentioned that someone who is working in public sector may have very different responsibilities than those who are working in private sector. And even within, say, private sector, there is a wide variety of roles and responsibilities there. So we have to customise the delivery of this qualification to suit both the role, but also the learner and your prior knowledge, skill, your prior experience before you come onto programme. And to do this, we would create an individual learning assessment plan. This is essentially a list of learning activities which you can complete and assessment activities which you can complete to produce that portfolio of evidence during the on-programme stage. As the SIPS diploma is part of this qualification, you will have that content delivered to you. That may be a classroom workshop, it may be an online module, it may be videos, it might be a book or guides, but either way that content's going to be delivered to you and that will be standard across the course. However, there will be learning activities which are created and they're tailored to your role. So an example of that could be shadowing a colleague or sitting down with someone who really knows how to use your procurement system and can talk you through how to use it. So that would be an individual learning activity specific to you, whereas the SIPS Level 3 workshops would be something which all learners complete. This training has to be logged as a requirement for the apprenticeship. You must spend 20% of your time on programme completing off-the-job training, and this training has to be logged. The training activities are logged in your journal, so whenever you complete a training activity, you'd create an entry in your journal to log that. And these typically would be the SIPS workshops, learning activities which have been assigned to you, and the time spent producing your portfolio of evidence. But there is more involved, there is more that could be included as part of that. Also in the on-programme stage, you would then look to complete these assessments. So the first assessment during the stage is the portfolio of evidence. This is a portfolio of evidence which demonstrates your competency in performing the KSBs in the workplace, and it is largely based around tasks which you'll complete. So you'll produce some evidence around a task that you complete, and that should cover a number of the KSBs in your portfolio. All of the KSBs have to be covered, and ideally they're covered more than once, so you can show over a period of time and in different contexts and situations. Also on the on-programme stage, this is where you'd complete the SIPS Level 3 Advanced Certificate in Procurement and Supply Operations. That is assessed through exams. And thirdly, during this phase, you would also look to achieve your Level 2 functional skills in Maths and English. If you already have this, it will be assessed by Recognised Prior Learning. If you don't already have it, then that can be delivered to you and assessed, and your assessor will discuss that with you. Gateway is a check, and it's a check to ensure that you are ready and comfortable and confident to move on to the endpoint assessment. It's an evaluation discussion with both the apprentice, with a representative from your employer, so typically your mentor, and with the training provider rep, which is usually your assessor. And it's a discussion. Ultimately, it is usually the employer that makes the final decision, but if everyone wasn't comfortable, you wouldn't move on to that endpoint assessment stage, and some additional activities can take place to ensure that you're ready for it. As a prerequisite, you must have spent a minimum of 12 months on programme to move to the gateway stage, so you can't complete this qualification any sooner, and you also must have achieved the requirements of gateway. So the requirements of gateway is that you have completed that portfolio of evidence, you've achieved the SIPS Level 3 certificate in Procurement and Supply Operations, you've achieved both your functional skills Level 2 in Maths and English, and you've also completed a mock endpoint assessment. So your assessor will complete that mock endpoint assessment, which gives you good prep so that you're ready to do it for real in the endpoint assessment. It's also noted there that you'd sign off the EPA project title to ensure suitability. We'll talk about that when we discuss the endpoint assessments. So once those have been met, you then move on to endpoint assessment, and this is where you'll be allocated an independent endpoint assessor. You will have an assessor who will be your main point of contact for your learner journey throughout this programme, from the start until the endpoint assessment stage. At the endpoint assessment stage, another assessor will be allocated to conduct these assessments. The idea is they've got no prior relationship with you, so they're less likely to be influenced by anything that's happened previously. The endpoint assessment will assess the full range of knowledge, skills and behaviours that are in the published standard. So let's work through the endpoint assessment for this qualification. There is 2 endpoint assessments. However, the first endpoint assessment is split into two different sections. Essentially, there's part A and part B. So the first endpoint assessment is a work-based project with question and answer. The work-based project is completed after the apprentice has gone through Gateway. It's only at Gateway that the project title and scope is agreed with your independent endpoint assessor, and then you'd then complete that project at the endpoint assessment stage. So this isn't something you'd be working on during the on-program phase. The project should be designed to ensure the apprentice can demonstrate the knowledge, skills and behaviours, but the project should also be something which is relevant to your workplace, and it's a real business application, and so for that reason your employer's input is also welcome in determining the title and scope. The work-based project can be based on any of the following, so it could be a review of how your organisation uses procurement systems to select their suppliers and make recommendations on how the organisation could improve these systems. It could be a review into the current practice of how they maintain, create and amend purchase orders and contract records in order to ensure that tighter controls and cost savings, and evaluate the impact this has had on the purchasing system. Or it could be something like evaluate the use of ad hoc and low spend supplies and make recommendations on how this can be used to improve responsible procurement and evaluating potential suppliers, quotes and tenders. So those are 3 examples. That's not an exhaustive list, but just at this stage it's to give you an idea of what's involved in this project and what it's about. For the project you'd have to actually complete it, plan it out, complete it, and then you'd have to create a 3,000 word report. You can have plus or minus 10% of the word count discretionary if required. You have 12 weeks to complete the research and 2 weeks to write up the report. You've got the structure, so you've got introduction, background, aims and objectives, research, outcomes, implications, conclusions and recommendations, and that's the recommended structure for the report. For the presentation, this is now part B of your first assessment method. So you've produced the project, you've produced the report, that gets submitted and you get a grade for that. You then have to produce a presentation which would be followed up with a question and answer session, and the presentation should be based on your report. So you then take that report and turn it into a presentation. You can, for this presentation, use digital or paper-based methods, so you could have a flip chart or papers, although most likely it'll be a PowerPoint or Prezi presentation. It should be an overview of the project report. The presentation is done on a one-to-one basis with your independent endpoint assessor. And there'll be follow-up questions asked. So there'll be a list of questions which the assessor will have, and they'll then ask follow-up questions from that. As a minimum, they'll ask 6 questions. This endpoint assessment method will last 45 minutes, plus or minus discretionary 10%. The presentation will last 20 minutes approximately, and then there'll be approximately 25 minutes of questioning. And again, this is completed and submitted after Gateway, which also must be the case because your project can only be completed and worked on at the endpoint assessment stage. So the second and final endpoint assessment method is an interview underpinned by your portfolio. So this is where the portfolio comes into play for your assessments. So it's not the portfolio itself which determines your competency. It's this interview where you use the portfolio as a resource to answer the questions. This assessment method will last 60 minutes, plus or minus a discretionary 10%. It is completed on a one-to-one basis with your independent endpoint assessor. There will be a minimum of 6 questions, and follow-up questions are allowed. And during the questioning, learners are encouraged to refer to their portfolio. The portfolio should be submitted a minimum of 10 days prior to the interview to allow the endpoint assessor to have a look at it and base their questions around it. Essentially, the questions will be things such as, can you tell me about that situation? Can you tell me about that task? What was it you actually done there? Why did you do it that way? And the idea is it tests your higher level decision making and understanding skills. In terms of the grading for this qualification, there is 3 possible results. You could have a fail if you do not pass the endpoint assessment. You've got a pass, and if you do well, very well in your endpoint assessment, you'll receive a distinction. To see exactly how the grades are made up in the different bands, you can refer to the endpoint assessment strategy. So to summarise, let's have a look at the learner journey from start to finish. You begin the journey by creating an individual learning and assessment plan. From that plan, you'll then complete training. So those will be the SIPS workshops, Chartered Institute Procurement Supply workshops. You also complete workplace training such as shadowing colleagues, interviewing colleagues, and other workplace training activities. And then you also complete training on your functional skills in maths and English. All of this training is recorded and logged in the journal part of your portfolio. So you'd create entries into your journal each time you complete a training session. Once you've completed the SIPS workshops, you can then sit the SIPS exam, and upon successful completion of that, you'll receive the SIPS Level 3 certificate. Once you've completed workplace training and you're competent in performing individual tasks, you can then complete an assessment based on that task, and that assessment will be gathering evidence to show that you're competent at performing that task in the workplace. You don't have to wait until you've done all of your workplace training. As soon as you're competent at an individual task, you can then get evidence for that particular task for your portfolio. And regarding your functional skills, once you've learned about your functional skills to the required level, you can set the assessment and you'll gain those functional skills. Once all three of these assessments have been completed, you can move on to the gateway stage. At gateway, there'll be a check to ensure your portfolio is complete. You've got your SIPS Level 3 certificate. You've completed your functional skills Level 2 in maths and English, and you'll then complete a mock endpoint assessment. At that point, you'll have a discussion between your employer, training provider, and yourself as the learner to ensure that you're confident to move into endpoint assessment. You'll then move into endpoint assessment, where you'll be allocated an independent endpoint assessor to conduct the two assessment methods. Upon successful completion of those, you'll then achieve your overall apprenticeship. So thanks for listening. Hopefully that's made clear the journey. There is a number of different components, and the main takeaway is to see how they all fit together.